So I can't be the only one who put off watching this show because I thought it would actually be a commitment instead of barely over an hour long, right? Right? Yes, just me? Okay, so it might also be because I just don't care about Castlevania. The heyday of the games was before my time, and the subject matter never really appealed to me to begin with. Of course, I would only find out after having completed this series that showrunner Warren Ellis was in the same boat when he took on the project. Let me say, if this is how Ellis writes material he has no prior investment in, then the man deserves a bloody award. No, not that kind of blood, no, stop! Bollocks. Yeah, good a time as any to provide that disclaimer. Animated, based on a video game, not remotely for children. Not only does this show have some extreme language, but also the type of bloody violence that makes you go, damn! Also, disclaimer, because this show is so short yet packed with things to talk about, this is going to go into spoilers, so there's that. It's the 1440s, and Dracula is pissed. The one time the guy decides to open himself up to humanity, he manages to get a wife of 2 decades before she's up and murdered by an uppity bishop who takes her interest in science as witchcraft. Drac decides to turn his wrath on the whole city of Wallachia, and it's not good for anyone. The only man around who could possibly stop him is Trevor Belmont of House Belmont, and bad news, that guy isn't feeling all that up to saving the day. Of course, when he ends up passing through a town called Gretis that's next on Dracula's hit list, Trevor can't keep himself out of the conflict for very long. On the subject of Trevor, the guy is a great protagonist, equal parts grounded, cool, and funny. He's your quintessential moody but charming, though not altogether admirable action hero. Not to mention he's got the velvety voice of Richard Armitage doing his best Paul McGann. You'd be forgiven for thinking he's not the protagonist at first, however, since 95% of the first episode is a prologue dedicated to Dracula. The show sets up its hero and villain in such a way that their philosophies really aren't all that opposed. Both Trevor and Dracula are sympathetic characters, but Trevor starts the story with a desire to save his own neck and let the vampire's wrath take its course. Their shared flaw comes in the form of a belief that humanity is doomed to inaction. Dracula and Trevor both express a dismissive attitude toward people, believing that not even bystanders can be called innocent on account of the fact that they, well, stand by and allow evil to be performed by those in power, like the murder of Dracula's wife, who, even in her dying moments, pleads with Dracula not to seek revenge. The idea that an unwillingness to combat evil is something deserving of condemnation isn't remotely a bad one to hold, and the story supports this philosophy by having those complicit in evil actions pay the consequences. But Trevor and Dracula spend most of the story convinced that humankind can't be shaken out of its sense of compliance. Not that the story gives them much reason to believe otherwise at first. The natural response of everyone in Wallachia to the widespread consequences of Dracula's action seems to be blaming someone else for their problems and making them suffer for it. From the bishop and his priests who extort the townsfolk for power, to the drunkards who get into a fight with Trevor when they find out about his lineage. Partially because the Belmonts have been inactive for years when they were supposed to be humanity's protectors, but also partially because they blame the Dracula problem on the upper class and old families in general. Even Trevor himself is so resigned to the idea that Wallachia had Dracula's wrath coming that his first instinct upon finding someone he actually likes in the form of the wise old leader of a group called the Speakers is to tell them to hightail it out and run, leaving everyone else to their fates just like he does. Of course, the Speakers don't stand for that, and it's only after Trevor witnesses their staunch sense of responsibility and selflessness that he and the story take a turn for the optimistic. How fitting is it that the scene where things truly start to look up is when Sifa, the speaker for, well, the Speakers, joins up with Trevor and starts making good on her promise to be proactive. This is the scene where Trevor confronts one of the crooked priests in front of the whole town, and the townsfolk immediately take the priest out. Less than a minute later, the town is rallying behind Trevor and taking out demons who previously seemed indestructible with relative ease. I like that this moment comes after Trevor has already been convinced by Sifa to try and save the town, and had decided that he was going to stay and not run regardless of how the townsfolk felt about him. In the end, these people had not only the will but the right to survive the whole time, and although he had the example of Sifa and the other speakers to look toward and assume this, Trevor had to take it on faith that the rest of the town would be decent, worthy people in the end. All they ever needed was the wool pulled from over their eyes before they could end up too far gone like the bishop, who deluded himself so long and so hard that he killed someone who truly did no wrong. I think it's rather fitting that the story of Gretis actually ends there. The last chunk of the show is spent setting up more for the future, with Trevor and Sifa being separated from the town and dealing with Dracula's son Alucard, who had been set up prior as a sort of messianic figure and symbol of hope for the speakers. The last 10 minutes are all about that, and we never see Gretis fully drive off Dracula's hordes, but it doesn't feel like we're leaving too big of a loose end just because we don't see the immediate fate of the city. The story just did all it could, hammering in a sense of hope, and we as an audience can hold on to that hope and assume that the people who deserve to made it out okay. Speaking of the final moments of the series, what little I do know about Castlevania gives me just enough authority to report that it's exactly what you'd expect from one of the game's boss fights being given the animated treatment. And on top of that, I have to admire how much Alucard's presence works on a story level given how little screen time he has. Alucard is treated as a prophesied savior who will combat his father Dracula and end his attacks on humanity. The hope that the speakers display, which eventually turns Trevor around, is all rooted in a belief in what Alucard represents. The fact that Alucard doesn't actually show up until Trevor and Sifa have proven the town worth saving on their own reads like a bone being thrown to the human race for proving themselves ultimately good. They get their savior, but only after they prove capable of saving themselves both externally and morally. On that level, the story has a sense of thematic completeness, even though we've still got Dracula to take care of, and man am I looking forward to that. On a more technical note, I love the voice acting and how naturalistic it sounds. Even if there are some moments where everyone could speak up a bit, learning that the bishop was played by Matt Frewer of all people was kind of a shock since he's unrecognizable. The animation is of course gorgeous, and it better be, or else why is Netflix $20 billion in debt, am I right? The only possible downside to the series that comes to mind is in terms of structure. Geez, do these episodes move like a bullet, and if you went into it like me, expecting something paced like a television show instead of a short movie, then you're gonna be thrown off a bit. Honestly makes me wonder why Netflix decided to release it that way, but if that's my only problem, you know it's a good sign. Whether you're a fan of the games or not, I absolutely recommend you check this one out. Speaking of things you can check out, there's the other videos on this channel. You can also go into the comments and let me know what you think either about the show or about this video, on top of requesting anything else you'd want me to take a look at. I'll be covering some Doctor Who episodes in my next videos, and after that I've decided to take a season-by-season look at Teen Wolf. Each season will be its own video, and while I'll try to get them done as soon as possible, it's unlikely each video is going to be a consecutive release. That said, I hope you enjoy and stick around on the channel anyway.